So for your internal assessment for 2027, criterion B, defining the project. B1 is produce a problem statement. Now notice that the changes from criterion A is out of 9 marks. It changes to 6 marks for criterion B. So for B1, what you've got to do is explain. From our rubric, we can see that we got to explain the problem statement with key opportunities for the redesign of the product informed through the task analysis. So basically, what you're doing is you're using the information that you've got from criterion A to produce a problem statement in very simple terms. Looking at the rubric here, we've got our present, describe, and explains. So just to kind of reiterate these again, present is offer for display, observation, examination, or consideration. Describe is give a detailed account, and explain is give a detailed account including reasons or causes. Okay, so you have to factor these in when you're completing your IA, and remember that this is the bottom band, mid band, and basically your top band. Criterion B is out of 6 marks. You have 4 pages for this. It does say approximate page count here. However, the overall work page count is what really matters. So, if you use maybe, it says 1 page for B1, but if you use 2, that's absolutely fine. As you can see in some of the examples, 3 pages were used as well, and they were not penalized for it. For criterion B as a whole, you have 1,200 words. So my personal recommendation is somewhere around the 500 is what you would need for B1. Okay, and then that will leave for B2 for you to have about 700 words. But overall, it's the overall word count and overall page count is what matters. So our clarifications. The required evidence for the strand is a problem statement, which includes the current situation, the current problem, and a summary of research that informs appropriateness of the problem. Okay, as you can see here, it suggests that you use approximately 1 page for this. Now, I've highlighted this here because I'm going to refer back to this when I'm looking at some of the examples. I highly recommend that you use these as your subheadings on your page. Okay, so you've got the current situation as your subheading, the current problem, and then that will allow you to make sure that you hit what the IB basically are asking you to do so that you can hit that. And then if we look at the features of the design project here, these at the bottom here will link into it, and I'll go through that in a moment. So what I've done, rather than reading through this whole thing, I've just highlighted some key points here. So basically, the emphasize phase is basically criterion A. So you're not presenting kind of new research in criterion B at all. That should be all done in criterion A. So students should produce a concise problem statement, okay? No waffle, no long-windedness, just concise pieces of information, quality over quantity. You need to focus on the intended persona user needs, and you're looking at refining the problem. You need to be open to refining the problem statement based on new insights, feedback, and challenges. Now, I've highlighted the word synthesis here because you shouldn't be essentially creating new research here. That should be done in criterion A. Now, you can come up with something, but that should ideally be done in criterion A. So, for example, rather than the synthesize, kind of give an example for that is like if you were doing an interview, rather than listing out the questions and the interviews on the page, you don't necessarily get marks for that. What the IB are looking for you is, they would expect you to do an interview. So you would have a paragraph perhaps of information, highlighting the key feature, the key bits of information, the important pieces of information that you got from an interview. So that's what the kind of synthesis means, basically. So synthesize quantitative and qualitative research data findings. So you got to present the context of the problem and define the user needs and impact. So when I'm looking through some of the examples, I find that students follow this here, kind of structure the work around this as opposed to this, that it should be the other way around. You should be having these as your subheadings, and applying these pieces of information into these subheadings here. Now, to go through some examples. So this is the prosthetics example, one from the teacher support material. You'll notice here I've got the presents, describe, and explain here. You should be following that. Even just by looking at this example here, I would say, without even reading it, I would say that's probably going to be mid, potentially to top band. Okay, so as we can see here, the student received grade 5 for identifying areas suitable for redesign and providing product design specifications. While they were successfully pinpointed several areas for improvement using a suitable task analysis approach, there were a few gaps. In pinpointing areas for design, the student effectively highlighted the present circumstances, pinpointed the issue, and substantiated it with referenced research. So what that means basically is that the student had all the relevant research done in criterion A. Now, I hate to point it out, but if you do not do the adequate pieces of research, or basically if you don't do a good criterion A, you will struggle. Like it's near impossible to score well in criterion B, because criterion A, you're laying the foundation, and then in criterion B, you are essentially just highlighting, synthesizing the key points from criterion A. So what they could have done is enhancing this aspect through broader research into the bicycle braking problem, as clearly pinpointed, would have strengthened the basis for the proposed focus on redesign. Okay, to get a grade 5 for this is quite good. So my suggestions would be for this is just follow, if this was broken down into the current situation, the current problem, and then a summary of the research. So I would have, you've got the current situation and need here. I would have these as individual subheadings personally, just to make sure that you're kind of ticking all the boxes. Looking at example 2, the wheelchair disability desk, as you can see here, you know, there's a fair stark difference between the two. This got a grade 2. For aspects of the problem statement, which presents limited opportunities for redesign. Okay, you're not creating a new product, you're looking at an existing product that someone is using, so the primary or secondary persona is using, and you are redesigning the product. So you're not starting something from scratch. The student provided a research summary indicating a high percentage of older people with disabilities and conducted a basic task analysis of a user working at a table. Okay, so this here shouldn't essentially be here. This should be in criterion A, like this field test, that should be in criterion A, it shouldn't be in B1. However, to enhance their work, the student should have included an extended paragraph outlining the situation and the user's problem, supported by research validating the relevance of the problem. So basically what they're saying there is this essentially should, reading between the lines, it should be included in criterion A. And then that would allow you to kind of synthesize the research. Additionally, the student demonstrated poor use of images and insufficient annotation to explain the redesign opportunities. So as looking at these images here, one thing you need to factor in is that you are doing a design portfolio, okay? So your portfolio should be presented well. It's a design portfolio. It's not a math IA or the other subjects that you might have an IA in. So it's quite important. The presentation of your work is very important, and it's a pity that there isn't actual marks for the presentation, similar to how it is in the EE. I feel that's perhaps a missed opportunity, but in my opinion, there should be a marks going for the presentation and how you lay out your work. In these images here, quite small, difficult to make out, it's not legible. The moderator, the examiner will not spend much time. If they can't make something out, it's not legible. There will not be time wasted on it. So moving on with the same example, again, this should be included in criterion A, not criterion B. So kind of a recommendation here is just to follow the format here. This is from the features of the IA. So use the IBDT stated headings, the current situation, current problem, and then have a summary of the research. It should be a concise problem statement, and I've gone through this in the previous page. So looking at the third example, again, you could probably guess what this will get. I would say immediately from looking at it, it's probably in the bottom band. So for this example, I got a grade 2. The student outlined the current situation, but provided a limited description of the problem, lacking in-depth research. So what they could have done to improve it was to enhance this aspect. The student should have conducted a more thorough task analysis. So they should have done a better, basically, criterion A to identify opportunities for product redesign, specifically pinpointing to an existing product in need of information through this analysis would have been beneficial. So basically, for your A2, your storyboard, they should have picked a specific task and really gone into depth, broken that up into different stages. So again, as I mentioned before, if you don't do a good criterion A, your criterion B, it'll be at the detriment of your criterion B. So looking at another example here, this is the example for the trowel. The students achieved a grade 5 for identifying areas suitable for redesign and providing product design specifications, while the students successfully pinpointed several areas for improvement using a suitable task analysis approach. I have a bit of an issue with this, and I'll go through it in a minute. There were some shortcomings in identifying areas for redesign. The student effectively highlighted the current situation and identified the problem. Okay, so they used some secondary research here. Now, I can see here from looking at this example that there is kind of new bits of information here, which shouldn't really be the case. When we look at the improvements, however, there was limited research presented to support the appropriateness of the problem. Strengthening this aspect by incorporating more extensive research would have provided a more robust foundation for the proposed redesigns. So this is kind of a very vague, and it's really difficult to exactly gauge what is meant here. So I've kind of broken this down into what the student should have done essentially in the criterion A to achieve a better, basically, criterion B. So this should be in criterion A, ideally. Could have been in their A1 and maybe part of their A2. This bit here, that could be basically their A2. So suggestions were to improve the student could link to previous research. So, you're writing the synthesis of the research as opposed to generating new research, which the student has done. Personally, I don't feel this should have maybe been awarded top band, because they are presenting new information as opposed to looking at the information that it was in criterion A. And this is clearly stated as criterion B. So what they could have done in criterion A essentially was primary evidence, observed multiple users, so not just the one user, conducted short interviews, done a task analysis, so that's basically like your storyboard, comparative testing, so of 3 to 4 trials with users and which one performs better. So could have looked at quantitative evidence, so data such as time to complete the task, a comfort rating, and grip fatigue after use. Other items that they could have factored in, which they have here, again, this could have been in the criterion A as opposed to criterion B. Anthropometric data, now they have some of that here, but that is essentially this here is for their client, and then I suppose this here would be the secondary. So use hand sizes and grip strength for more than one user, linked to discomfort to ergonomic principles. They could have linked it to the product analysis, which is their A3 link. So essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to, all the hard work that you've done in criterion A, you're trying to showcase it in B1 essentially. So what they could have done here is to improve it, to get into that. Even though they got top band, I feel that's quite generous because they're not actually doing what they should have. in the criterion A, if they had a good product analysis, they could compare existing trials. So, and then they could have the synthesis of the research here for that, identify common weaknesses across products. Then for the secondary research, they could have looked at gardening forums and reviews. So could it be YouTube videos, different blogs and whatnot. They could have researched materials, why steel and plastic handles fail or succeed, and then identifying existing solutions and their limitations. Okay, so essentially this is all kind of work that they should have done in criterion A, and then that would have helped them to potentially get 6 out of 6 or 5 out of 6 for their criterion B1. So looking at this example here, this is the example 5, the FPV drone racing tool. So as you can see here again, it's one page. Doesn't seem to be any kind of new bits of research. Although it looks good initially looking at it, when we kind of go through it with a fine-tooth comb, you will see that in the problem statement, the student received grade 2, while the student introduced a new issue related to the FPV drone flying and proposed a solution. There was a lack of clarity in identifying opportunities for redesigning the product. So this is a redesign IA. It's not a make up a new product, okay? It's changed from the old syllabus to the new syllabus. So you're looking at an existing product and how to make it better. So what they could have done is, instead of using a task analysis based on existing products to inform the redesign process, the student implied the creation of a new product to meet identified needs. To enhance the section, the student should have focused on how existing products could be redesigned to address the user's needs more effectively. So again, I would recommend using the subheadings that the IB have specifically asked for in the guide. And what they could have done is, in their criterion A, they could have had the primary evidence here. So observe FPV users flying, conducted interviews, different people, and then that would highlight the pain points, any learning curve, visibility, comfort, cost of damage. For their A2, their storyboard, their task analysis. So they could have done a setup, takeoff, flight, landing, and any problems, see patterns that occurred, comparative product evidence. So this could have linked in with their criterion A3. Test and compare different FPV drones, controllers, and goggles. Identify common issues across the product. So any fragile frame, poor ergonomics, signal loss, and then state or list gaps in the current design. Could have also looked at quantitative evidence, crash frequency, setup time, battery life versus flight time, user confidence rating. They could have looked at ergonomics and human factors, analyze controller grip, button placement, hand fatigue, consider user skill, and then secondary research. They could have looked at forums, YouTube reviews, research safety, and looking at existing products, which is kind of your A3 link also. So as we go through the different examples, this one here, the concern I have with this one is that there's new information, there's new research demonstrated in this one here as 3 pages, which is quite a bit when they say that it should only be 1 page. Somewhere for this B1, you're going to have about probably 1 to 2 pages. 1 page if you do it correctly, if you've done the sufficient amount of work that's required in your criterion A. It should just take 1 page. So here, this is just a checklist. I recommend looking at this before you start your B1. So have you got your primary and secondary persona done in your criterion A? So one specific realistic persona, clearly linked to the product being redesigned. And one thing also that you really need to highlight the need for the redesign as well when you're going through your example here. So one thing I forgot to mention, you have to highlight it's mentioned here on one of them, the reason for the redesign. So you've got ergonomics and human factors here, detailed persona analysis, insight driven, clear links to the redesign. So problems are clearly connected to the existing products, leads logically into a design problem, shows this is a worthwhile problem to solve. That is probably one of the most important points here on the page. And then your presentation, it's going to be 1 to 2 pages for this. You've got around 500 words for this. So I'll just change that to 1 here. And your annotated images, make sure that they're clear. I've seen a good few images that are stretched and they're just not legible. Minimum waffle, no unnecessary text, and just make sure your information is concise and to the point. And it needs to be well structured and easy to follow. So kind of how you lay out your criterion A is going to be very important, because that will kind of set you up nicely to write a successful B1.